Uh,
This is Art Viewing
all
Adventures.
right.
We've been doing this for more than 4 years, talking about art related topics in the Bay Area. Don't ask me who this guy is above me. I'm pushing, but he has nothing to do with art in the Bay Area. But I'm Rodney Paul, and I'm joined by Avril Angevine, who is a fellow museum guide. And before we jump into the program, Nikki, tell us about the Community Living Campaign.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everybody. It is afternoon already. Hi, the Community Living Campaign, we're a nonprofit in San Francisco, and we help people who have disabilities, adults with disabilities, with jobs, with advocacy, things like that. And we help seniors with activities and advocacy. So we have art programs, writing programs, exercise classes on the west side of the city in different locations. Lots and lots of interesting stuff. But this is one of my favorite programs about the art world. And Rodney's so great. He lets me contribute now and then some things that I'm involved with. So that's wonderful. I want to talk later about Lorraine's new exhibit or her new murals in San Francisco. So I'll do that at the end, but I want to hear Avril and what she's going to talk about today. So welcome, everybody.
Yeah, and let me just add about you, April, that you've been a guest many times on the program, and you and I have served together as guides at an unnamed museum of modern art in San Francisco. But you've also done things for so many different museums, and you've taught art history, and it's just always great to have you here. So welcome to Art Viewing Adventures, and tell us about Jack London, photographer.
Yeah. Okay. Shall I bring up my screen here? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All righty. So here we go. Share the screen. And now
Let me just say, if people have comments, throw them in the chat. We may stop and do questions at some point, right, Avril?
yeah. People want to ask questions or make comments, please go ahead and do that. That's fine. It's fine with me if you unmute and say something rather than typing in the chat, but whatever is fine. Whatever anybody wants to do, that would be great. So there we go. Okay, so well, most of us, like myself, I've been in the Bay Area for a long time in Berkeley. So Jack London is somebody, I know about, hear about all the time. And now having moved to Sonoma, which is really close to Jack London State Park, Jack London's in the air. And I learned about his photography by being involved up there at the park. And I was really surprised. So I put this together and I hope that you enjoy it and learn something more about somebody who may be fairly familiar to you. And of course, Jack London, here he is best remembered today as the author of the middle school classic, right, Call of the Wild. But he did far more in the 40 years he was alive than just write a novel that has never been out of print since its publication in 1903. He, in fact, wrote over 50 books and hundreds of newspaper articles. It was his practice to write 1,000 words a day. And don't try this at home. That's a lot to do. He was the first American author to earn $1 million in his lifetime. And his life was as exciting and eventful as the books he wrote. But Jack had another talent, one that isn't as well known as his writing and adventuring. Jack had a love affair with the camera. He was one of the most photographed celebrities of his day, and even today, many of us recognize Jack London. Here he is, for example, with Harry Houdini, another celebrity of the era. Here's an image of, I'm sure, an eminently forgettable movie, but that's how he was portrayed. His image was used to sell all sorts of things, from grape juice to men's suits. But he went behind the camera too in an auspicious moment when technological advances such as small folding cameras, flash powder, and fast film helped real documentary photography get off the ground. So before we look at some of his 12,000 sensitive, sophisticated images, let's meet Jack London. Born at 3rd and Brannan Streets in San Francisco in 1876. That's more or less how it looked then. I believe his former home, which burned down in the earthquake and fire, became a bank. I'm sure he would disapprove of that. I don't know what it is now, probably nothing. Anyway, his mother, Flora Wellman, was a music teacher and spiritualist. His probable father, William Cheney, was an itinerant astrologer who took off before Jack was born. Jack's mother, by all accounts, a difficult and harsh woman, attempted suicide, and baby Jack was put with a wet nurse, neighbor Jenny Prentice, a formerly enslaved woman who provided Jack with love and support during his childhood. So
You're muted, Avril.
Yeah, you just got muted, April.
what happened? Well, at least it told me unmute. Is that okay? Am I
Yeah.
unmuted? Okay.
We can hear you.
Somebody up there doesn't like me, okay. So later the same year, the year of Jack's birth, his mother married John London. Okay, gotta do this. Do it this way, yeah. John London, a widower with 2 daughters. This is, Jack considered John London his father, and he called him the best man he ever knew. So this is the hand he was dealt with as he started out life. The family was working class, poor, and frequently moved around the Bay Area from Livermore to San Mateo before finally settling in West Oakland. Okay, there we go. There's Jack with his dog Rollo in 1885 when he was about 9. Jack graduated from grammar school at 14 and immediately went to work in a cannery where he became what he would later call a work beast, working 12 to 16-hour days for 10 cents an hour. But he always loved to read, and his refuge was the Oakland Public Library, where he was befriended and mentored by librarian Ina Coolbrith, who herself was a friend of Mark Twain and Bret Harte, and later became California's first poet laureate. Now, Jack London was a determined autodidact. He taught himself everything, but he was also wildly physical and athletic. And despite some chronic medical conditions, he loved the sea. And at 15, Jenny Prentice helped him buy a sloop called the Razzle Dazzle, which he used to pursue a career as an oyster pirate, raiding by night in dead silence the South Bay oyster beds that were owned by the hated Southern Pacific Railroad. Then he would take his haul up to Barbary Coast, San Francisco, and sell them in the morning. He could make more in a week as a pirate than in a month in the cannery. A maritime accident persuaded Jack to instead throw in his lot with the Fish Patrol, which was the precursor of the California Fish and Game Commission, which he had spent his pirate career evading. And as you can see there, all these adventures ended up in his stories. Now, in 1893, when he was 17, Jack signed on to hunt seals on the schooner Sophie Sutherland, bound for the coast of Japan. When he returned, the country was in the grip of the financial panic of 1893, and Oakland was swept by labor unrest. I'm going to do something here. Whoops. Okay. After working in a jute mill and on a street railway power plant, London joined Coxey's army. Oh, whoops, I went ahead. There's Coxey's army. Thousands of men who marched on Washington to protest conditions for the working man. So kind of the first million-man march way back then. Both leaving and returning to Oakland, Jack rode the rails as a tramp or a hobo, as they called them in those days. He was jailed for 30 days for vagrancy at Niagara Falls, and this gave him a permanently bad impression of American justice. He actually stood up and said, but, and they didn't listen to him. 30 days in the slammer. Now, these experiences are documented in his memoir, The Road, which is actually a very good read. Now, the following year, Jack joined the Socialist Party. The San Francisco Chronicle called him the boy socialist of Oakland, who, as a speaker at City Hall Park, always gets the biggest crowds and the most respectful attention. Any man, in London's opinion, who strives for a better form of government than the one he lives under is a socialist. Now, as you can see this incredible photograph, he ran twice for mayor of Oakland and even got 900 votes the second time. He then attended high school, Oakland High School, where he often studied at Heinhold's First and Last Chance Saloon, a dockside bar which is still open in what is now Jack London Square in Oakland. Now, after attending a summer cramming academy in Alameda, Jack was admitted to UC Berkeley. So picture this, Jack London, who at 19 had already been a farm worker, a factory worker, a sailor, a pirate, a railroad tramp, and a socialist provocateur who had served time for vagrancy, he found UC Berkeley a bit tame. It was not the place it was in the 1960s by any means. Oh, he got his first toothbrush the year he was 19 also. He lasted at Berkeley for about 4 months, but he ran out of money, but also he thought the professors were ignoramuses. He knew more than they did and so forth. So as a plan B, Jack and his brother-in-law lit out for the Yukon and the Klondike gold rush. Like many others, Jack was malnourished in the gold fields and developed scurvy. His gums became swollen, leading to the loss of his 4 front teeth. He developed a constant gnawing pain in his hip and leg muscles, but his struggles there inspired his first short stories, including To Build a Fire, which many critics consider his best. He later regretted that he had not brought a camera with him on this trip. So back in California, he began to write in earnest. He worked hard on crafting an effective style, but he always saw writing as a way to earn a living, using his brain instead of his back. If he knew it, I don't know if he knew it, he would have agreed with Dr. Samuel Johnson's dictum that none but a blockhead ever wrote but for money. He set to work just as new printing technologies and lower cost production of magazines resulted in a boom in popular fiction, a strong market for short fiction. In 1900, he earned $2,500 from magazines, something close to $100,000 today. His novel, Martin Eden, recounts and no doubt exaggerates his early struggles with tight-fisted editors and unimaginative critics. He married in 1900 and had 2 daughters, as we see here. 2 days after his divorce in 1904, he married Charmain Kittredge, an adventurous, high-spirited, and sexually liberated woman who Jack called his mate woman. I think his first wife, Bessie, was sort of a Victorian woman, but after the turn of the century, but Charmain was a modern woman. They boxed, they fenced, they cycled and sailed together. Charmain not only held her own, she occasionally knocked him out. Jack was turning out a prodigious amount of copy, and when not writing, they traveled, most famously sailing their sloop, the Snark, which was built in Oakland's salt marshes, on a 2-year trip around the Pacific, visiting Hawaii, Tahiti, Samoa, Fiji, and Australia. The trip inspired writings by Jack, and in fact, he finished Martin Eden on the boat, as well as 3 books by Charmain. In 1905, they moved to Glen Ellen in the Valley of the Moon, just north of the town of Sonoma, and began buying the land that eventually became the 1,400-acre Beauty Ranch and is today Jack London Historic State Park. And it is probably the most beautiful state park in California. Jack, who was largely self-taught and was always a quick study, began devouring agricultural and scientific manuals. He consulted with Luther Burbank, and he availed himself of the resources of the University Farm, founded at Davis in 1905. So he was one of their first clients. Though the ranch was something of an economic failure, including things like a plan to raise and sell eucalyptus as building material, that was a non-starter. He also planted a kind of cactus. He had spineless cactus he saw in Hawaii to feed cattle, but what grows in Hawaii, as wonderful and as fruitful as Sonoma is, what grows in Hawaii doesn't necessarily grow there. But nevertheless, Jack was proud of developing a system of sustainable agriculture, which would later be praised for its ecological insight. He and Charmain continued to travel, managing a final trip to Hawaii, always returning to the ranch and always full of plans. But Jack's chronic illnesses, including an infection picked up in the South Pacific, which resulted in lesions on the skin, which was treated with mercury. These things and his lifelong embrace of tobacco and alcohol all took a toll, and he died of kidney failure in November 1916 at age 40, which is staggering. But even with all that going on, Jack still had time to become a skilled and sensitive photographer. His photography, as I said, benefited from technological advances of his day, just as his writing career was helped by improvements in printing technology, especially the use of halftone photographs. Photography, as I'm sure you know, began in the 1830s, and at first, would-be photographers needed a knowledge of chemistry and a sense of daring to get going. Early landscape photographers like Carlton Watkins and Ansel Adams lugged huge, heavy glass plates, like 12 by 18 glass plates, usually on mules and always with a dog, to their destinations, and they had to develop their photos on the spot. But when Jack set to work, smaller portable cameras with roll film allowed photographers much greater freedom of movement and allowed them to capture previously elusive subjects. So, for example, Matthew Brady's famous Civil War photographs, for example, rarely showed movement because the film couldn't tolerate it. By Jack's time, though, photographers were able to capture bombed buildings, mangled artillery, and sunken ships. This is not a photograph by Jack, but it's by one of his colleagues because he was at this battle himself. So in 1900, Eastman Kodak introduced the 3A, which produced a postcard-sized negative on roll film. This is the camera that Jack favored, though he also used a panoramic camera, stereoptic, and even view cameras too. There he is. I believe this is him taking a photograph of the Rose Parade in Pasadena. It's just like, it's all so interesting. Depending on the project, he would develop images himself, often in the wet, salty, and rocking atmosphere of a boat, or send them home for development. 90% of the 12,000 photos he took between 1900 and 1916 were taken outside the US, mostly in Asia and the South Seas. So I want to show you images from a few of his major projects. Now, the first one was unique in his archive, though it syncs really well with his socialist inclinations. In 1902, Jack arrived in London en route to South Africa to cover the Boer War for the Hearst Syndicate, only to find that the war had ended. He was at loose ends, and he decided to stay in London's East End, the famous impoverished East End, disguised as a runaway sailor down on his luck in order to observe and record the conditions of the poor. His written analysis was published with his photographs the next year as People of the Abyss. The book sold well, appearing at a time when others were also turning their lenses on the oppressive conditions of the poor in cities such as London and New York. Jacob Riis, in fact, another reporter who became a photographer to better document the conditions he wanted to expose, he published How the Other Half Lives in 1890, and this is a book that Jack knew well. Like Riis, Jack often photographed children. Though candid, his photos are beautifully composed, and the subjects are portrayed without sentimentality or objectification. So some of the cut lines here are from the book People of the Abyss, which is a really interesting thing to read, although it does suffer from Jack's decision to put dialogue, to write it phonetically as they speak it, "Oi, mate," and so forth. It's a little annoying, but the book is good. So this one, Descendants of the Seafaring Folk, Jack London, given who he was and when he lived and so forth, he was very much interested in and sort of proud of the Anglo-Saxon race that, you know, came to the New World, America, and became pioneers, came across the country and so forth. And this, what he saw in London, was what had happened to the mighty seafaring folk, right? There's a cute kid. There's another kind of like a studio shot almost of a young family. This is a nice, this shows you the quality of the photography at that time. And this is a wonderful image of an area in the center of the East End where he was working. The building on the right is Spitalfields Market, and to the left, I love the title Pearson Plenty, the People's Cafe chain, with the General Gordon Temperance Hotel up above. He, as you can see, is actually able to document a lot of movement in this image. And I love the way he did not station himself directly opposite the street there. So it goes back at an angle and provides a really interesting way into the depth of the image, but all kinds of stuff going on in there. It's fascinating. Here's another, okay, inside the courtyard of the Salvation Army barracks on a Sunday morning. And here, this too, I think is a stunning image. All these men in bowler hats. And believe it or not, I looked this up. Bowler hats, which we sort of associate with kind of the upper classes, they were originally designed for working men, actually for miners, because they're very hard. They kind of protect your head. But I love the way in this image that many of the men are just staring at, these are tickets they were given for free breakfast on Sunday morning, and others are looking at Jack. So he's able to be present and not be intrusive here. Really interesting image. And here's another from a different angle. And his quotation, his cut line is, "For an hour we stood quietly in this packed courtyard." And it's noticeable that, these are all men who are down on their luck, living in the East End of London. Here, more of them have the, the cap, the worker's cap. What more do we have? Here's another one. In the workhouse. So they still at this time had workhouses. If you were going to sleep at night for free, you had to do a little bit of work. Guy in the front, it kind of reminds me of images of James Joyce, but I don't believe it's him. But I looked this up too. Picking oakum was a punishment in Victorian times. Basically, what it meant is they were taking rope apart and taking the strands out, which were then used as like packing for stuff, or sort of like caulking around windows and so forth. Terrible, boring work, but there they are. And this image, the way the light is reflected in here, makes a kind of artistic shot. It's interesting. Oh, and here's a slavey, they call it a slavey. This is interesting that if you can see on the photograph, there's two lines on it indicating where it was cropped for publication. But I like this larger image a little bit better. And I like how she's, she's happy with her lot there. He's shooting down at her and she's looking up. He's managing to ingratiate himself with people, I would say. What more do we have? Oh, okay. More things change, the less they change. Is a guy sleeping on a grate, and he, like many photographers, street photographers after him, including Dorothea Lange, makes good use of signs, right? So Truth, the weekly newspaper, and there's the Truth lying there, a man down on his luck, the policeman shining a lantern on him, like that. The beautiful shot of what they call the Doss House. And if you can see up above, it says, good beds for men only, for shillings, I don't know what, a night. But a beautiful shot, I think, really nice recession into the background. Good. I like the group of children. And here again, there's so much going on in this image. And, as with some of the other images we'll see later, I wonder how often kids like this would have been photographed. What they weren't certainly really comfortable with a camera, I wouldn't believe, but some of them are looking at him, some are looking somewhere else. I love the dog in the front that's had some ink touch up on him, and men in the back looking in and so forth. Just a wonderfully, and some kids looking back, some looking forward, just a wonderfully active kind of image.
I want to interject, Avril. I think the lighting and the contrasts in this photograph are really notable. And I noticed that in some, like the very first one you showed me of the child in the doorway, he seemed to be a master at getting the faces to contrast with dark backgrounds. Was he using lighting to achieve this? What are your thoughts on how he made that happen?
No, because they're outdoors, so there's no lighting other than what's there, and it's London, right? Probably the light is not real good most of the time. No, I think this is what's kind of astonishing. He's certainly not the only person to fall into this category, but he had no training at this, and he just really has a natural sense of what makes a strong image. And I think it's partially because he was interested in common people. That was his thing, children, people down on their luck. And he takes time with them, you know, to produce an image. But yeah, I'm sure there are some images that didn't turn out, right? These are the good ones. But yeah, he has managed to get good quality in these photographs for sure. And again, this is producing a negative the size of a postcard. So it's a big negative. So when they're blown up, as in the one book that I know about, they're absolutely stunning. Good. Thank you, Rodney, for your comment. It's another group of children playing, and you can see no grass, nothing. This is in the streets and very urban environment they live in. Creatures huddled there, sleeping or trying to sleep. So apparently these houses, DOS houses and so forth, were occupied day and night. Some people got to sleep at night, others had to sleep in the day. And if you couldn't get a bed at night, you were kind of on your own. At least they didn't put, you know, dividers in the benches, apparently, the way they do now to keep people from sleeping on them. But these are women. And these are men. It's a night image. So there's some light there, probably street lights. I'm sure he didn't have lighting with him on the Thames embankment. I think that's the last one here. Yeah. So these are interesting images when London is moving around. London is in London, right? Disguised as a sailor and interacting with these people and documenting their lives. And it's an interesting book, People of the Abyss. So Jack was a prolific journalist, as I said, writing hundreds of articles, which appeared in publications from the San Francisco Examiner and the New York Herald to Sunset Magazine, the Yale Monthly, the Socialist Voice, even House Beautiful. I think he wrote about his wolf house that burned down for House Beautiful. His photos often accompanied his work. His coverage of the Russo-Japanese War for the Hearst Syndicate in 1904 resulted in a powerful series of photographs. So it was not taken by Jack London, but there he is with a group of Korean dignitaries. So the threat of a war between a European power, Russia, and an Asian nation that was still regarded in the West as exotic and mysterious, well, this captivated major world newspapers who sent journalists rushing to the Far East during the first weeks of 1904. So the war between these two countries was over control of Korea and Manchuria, and most of it seems to have been fought in Korea. So among this group was Jack London on his first actual news assignment. Though he was not yet a reporter, he had already received world acclaim for Call of the Wild, which sold 10,000 copies on the day it appeared. Well, that's pretty good. Now, Jack, of course, saw war reporting as an even more exciting and dangerous adventure than gold prospecting in Alaska. But the Japanese authorities rigidly controlled the activities of journalists and largely succeeded in keeping them behind the lines. Jack became the most famous correspondent of the war, sending hundreds of photos and dozens of dispatches. The first few were written on rice paper. Though because of these official restrictions, only one of the Battle of Yalu was actual battlefield reporting. So Jack turned his lens on the human face of the war, on the people left behind whose lives were uprooted, notably old men and children. But he also made many photos of Japanese soldiers readying for war and the primitive machinery used to carry it out. Jack's Korea images show his developing photographic skills and his humanistic approach. He shot children at their level and showed human beings engaged in daily life during a difficult time. Oh, okay. So here he is with some fellow passengers on the route to Yokohama. And again, he gets down, he's squatting down to take this image, really focusing on the child there. But it's interesting, the other people in the image are probably having the same reaction that he is to going. He tends to have people in the front. One of his strategies is to focus on people in the front, but he gets enough background to give context without really distracting from the real source of the real heart of the image. Okay, here we go. some Korean refugees fleeing the Japanese army. And again, I find it interesting. I'm imagining that people like this had probably not been photographed too much before. So he's able somehow to get close enough to them, inspire confidence in them to let him take photographs like this. Some of the Japanese soldiers. Japan, I'm sure you won't remember, but Japan won this war. And it was quite a big deal because it was the first time an Asian nation defeated Europeans, and it gave them, at this point, control of Korea. So bear in mind that this is the winning army when he shows the Japanese soldiers. Kind of interesting. And, but there's still casualties, right? This is a really lovely image where he understands somehow intuitively the rule of threes, and he's got the main figure there off center. But again, we have nice recession into the background, and can see a lot going on behind the main figures. That's a great image. And some children, just this little guy's looking at him and going, what is that? What are you doing? Why are you here? But he's getting down and showing kids. Another group of children. This reminds me of the one in London where they're staring at him, wondering probably what he's doing. But he's probably, what would you say, Rodney, laughing, making sounds to get them to look at him or something like that.
Yeah,
Really,
you got to think like they might never have seen a photograph in their lives. Like, kid today wouldn't totally know what it means when someone pulls out a camera.
Well, actually, no, they wouldn't, right? If it wasn't on a phone, they probably wouldn't know what it was. And his camera was the kind with the bulb on it that you would squeeze to make the picture go and make the shutter go. Anyway, it's cool. Some other images of daily life. I like that he got a man with his child there and a woman. And over on the right, that's a barber, right? Daily life. It's a really cool image of a group of children. And that's a really astonishing photograph of them looking at him.
And you feel like he did a really good job of building rapport with his subjects.
Well, he must have done. So, I mean, it's interesting when you talk about photography, this sort, the street photographer versus like a portrait photographer. And a street photographer, kind of steals it and images, grabs images. And it doesn't seem as though he was doing that. They're not studio portraits, but there's someplace in between. It's clear that he's interacting with people. And I think given the circumstances, he would have to be able to photograph them this intimately. But he takes them seriously. Certainly at this time, the beginnings of the 20th century, photography was around, and there was lots of anthropological, National Geographic type photography that showed people, Asians, and certainly when we look the next images of the South Seas, they often would photograph people from the side view so you could see the skull. They were looking at them as sort of specimens, right? And he's not doing this. He's really looking at these as individuals who are worthy of being.
And I'm thinking maybe he explained to them, like, here's what I'm doing. Here's why I want you to really engage with, like, look at this camera because I'm capturing your image.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what he did, how he did these photographs, but yeah, but I mean, in addition to that whole aspect of them, many of them, like this one on the left, are just really strong compositionally. They're wonderful images.
Yeah.
Oh, well, here's the winning army, Japanese army. And this I love on the left, that's a Cossack, that's a Russian soldier. And again, the sad situation or the tiredness, exhaustion really of these soldiers. Let's see. Oh, here again, this is not by Jack, but of Jack being stopped and having his papers examined. He was arrested 3 times in Korea. The first time he had his camera confiscated, and apparently it was given back to him by the intervention of a group of Japanese journalists who, thought the man needs his camera. The third time and then he left and came back to the United States, was through the intervention of Teddy Roosevelt, had to rescue Jack. Teddy Roosevelt had to rescue Jack London. It was kind of cool. Now, many of Jack's photos document his personal life, his friends, his ranch, and hundreds of his mate woman, Charmain. and their adventures at sea. And so the Cruise of the Snark, a record of their voyage in 1907, was the second of Jack's books to include his own photographs. So on this ship that, as I said, was constructed in Oakland in the harbor there, he had, of course, a typewriter, 400 books, a phonograph, and an astonishing 500 records on the ship with him. And here he is, again, not a photograph taken by him, possibly by Charmain, with somebody he's come across. And he's smiling there. He says, this is great. Here I am. So as with his Korea work, Jack's images are the peoples of the South Pacific, which would be brand new subjects to most Western readers, show an unusual level of both empathy and photographic sophistication. As I said, he was among the first observers to consider the islanders not as specimens, but as individuals worthy of notice. Right, so let's look at some of his images here. In the various islands where he stopped. So these men on Nukuhiva, the largest of the Marquesas Islands. So it's interesting that in 1842, Herman Melville's book Taipei was published, and it was about his own adventures in this area on these islands. And Jack knew the book, was really anxious to go there, and was shocked by what had happened, because in the 40 or 50 years between Melville's arrival and Jack London's, people had been decimated by Western diseases and so forth. It was no longer the tropical paradise that Melville described. And this is something that Jack writes about a lot in the book, and he's well aware of what Western intervention has done to these lands. But check this out. I mean, this is like the photograph of all time. There's the phonograph record. He's probably playing Caruso or something like this. And the men sitting there in, kind of traditional, probably ceremonial dress. Apparently they would dance to the music that he brought with. It's really cool. And here's a family in front of their home with their possessions, tobacco leaves and the New Hebrides. And again, he's squatting down, he's low down, he's looking right at people, they're looking right at him, and there's no, they just seem like people, daily people to him. Love that one. This, I don't think Jack took this, but I put it in here because that has to be Jack London up the palm tree. That's just like, that's so Jack London. You gotta have.
Looks like his posture, right?
Yeah. There's something about, I'm sure it's him, although I don't know for certain. A couple of other images again, and he uses the one on the right, this strategy of shooting slightly from below that all photographers use to make the subject seem a little more imposing and so forth. Yep. He was a very athletic guy, and he discovered surfing, got into surfing. He liked to surf. He's one of the first white guys to surf, apparently. And again, he just developed a distinctive photographic style in keeping with his kind of political philosophy. He favored a relatively long lens, enabling him to photograph a subject engagingly, even some distance away. He was able to control the depth of field so that the subjects are often shown in sharp focus, where the background is blurred a little bit, which foregrounds the sitter and provides context while suppressing distracting details. Again, when he shoots slightly below the sitters, he gives them kind of a sense of dignity, sometimes exaggerating the angle to create novel effects. In a way, his photographs are the visual embodiment of his socialist political philosophy as he understood it, emphasizing humanity in the face of poverty and sympathy to the plight of people who were exploited. A gorgeous photograph with a very, very stereoscopic camera here of presumably Charmain in Hawaii. Some Marquesan men again, and women, mother and child. So documenting some interesting practices that he sees in fishing with stones and leaves, and some surfers. Very cool. Now, the Solomon Islanders. This was a dangerous part of the journey. The Solomon Islanders were apparently cannibals at this time. They certainly would decapitate people taken in battle and so forth. And yet there he is, and they're squatting down, kind of like a group photograph of a football team or something. It's really cool. Now here is Charmain, and you will notice that she's packing a revolver there because the Solomon Islands were a slightly dangerous place, certainly for white visitors like this. And you'll also notice in this photograph and this one, which is even more interesting, that around her ankle there's a bandage, and this was because of this disease called yaws that was an infection that everybody on the ship picked up that caused lesions on the skin. And as I said, they treated it with mercury, but actually, like in our youth, we had mercurochrome to put on things. That was mercury. And in fact, in the museum at Jack London State Park, there's their medical kit from the ship, and it's absolutely staggering. There's cocaine. The stuff was available in drugstores. Is what they used to treat things. And apparently this mercury treatment entered the system and was ultimately the cause of his kidney failure. But this photograph, when it was published, the one on the left, was shocking, not because some of the women were naked, but because Charmain wasn't, and she was there with them. But it's quite an interesting image. Let's see, it's my last image. Yeah. So I wanted to finish by looking a little bit closer to home. There they are at work. So Charmain, I think Jack typed, but he typically would handwrite his copy, and she would type it for him and correct it and so forth. She was very, very involved in the production of his works. So on April 18th, 1906, Jack and Charmain were shaken awake in their cottage in Glen Ellen. When they rode their horses to the top of Sonoma Mountain, they could see San Francisco burning, and in the other direction, Santa Rosa was also burning. So they traveled to the city, where Jack covered the earthquake and fire for Collier's magazine, and he took photographs. Some of these we've seen other images like this of San Francisco, but it's fascinating that Jack London took them. I know, really, it was terribly, terribly destructive. Well, I like the guy who's going to open your safe for you in case, if you still have one. It's cool. This one actually is Santa Rosa. And this is the City Hall in Santa Rosa that suffered quite a bit of damage. So there we go. That's what Jack London did with a camera. I think he was an exceptional photographer. My view is that he was a really good writer too, a person who wrote as much as he did. I mean, it's not all top drawer, but when he's good, he's very, very good. A lot of his books, particularly Call of the Wild, is worth rereading as an adult. It's quite strong. But anyway, I think he did a really great job as a photographer, and it's a revelation to see these photographs. So only, as I said, a small percentage of them were ever published, either in his two books or accompanying his news photographs. Charmain and his stepsister, Eliza, put together albums of all these photographs, and they were eventually donated to the Huntington Library in Southern California, where they are, and you can see them digitized there. The original negatives are actually in the California State Parks collection. Like, who knew that State Parks has a photo collection? But they do. They're actually housed in the Sonoma Barracks in Sonoma. So the book that I mentioned, called Jack London Photographer, has prints in it made from the original negatives and from copy negatives from the albums at Huntington. And it's really interesting to look at. So there's where I'm going to stop. And Rodney, if you or anybody else has any questions.
I do, and I hope some others do too. You are a docent, I think, at Jack London State Park, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about that. Like, when are you there, and when?
Okay, so Jack London State Park, probably some of you know this, but state parks are defunded. They get no funding from the state. There's a big group called Jack London Park Partners who help support them and so forth. And it's an interesting park because, so anyway, there's like 300 volunteers working in this park. It's an interesting park because it's nature. And so there are hikes to do and things like that. And it's culture. It's got the little museum, it's got the cottage they lived in, and it's got the ruins of Wolf House. Their fabulous, fabulous house that burned down literally before it was ready to be occupied. So I am just, one of the trainings I was doing, they were talking about doing a hike, and somebody asked, what do you do if a snake goes across the path? Once I heard that, I said, I'll be in the museum. Thank you very much. I'm not dealing with snakes. But so there's somebody in there generally on a Saturday or Sunday. So I go maybe once a month. It's not a tour. I'm just in the museum and, answering questions. I learned quite a bit about Jack London and answer questions about him. And as I mentioned to Rodney at the beginning, it's absolutely fascinating that there are many, many foreign European visitors to Jack London Park, including Eastern Europeans, and they know Jack London much better than Americans do. He was very popular there. After his death, Charmain traveled to Europe. She was instrumental in getting his works translated into many languages, but also he was a socialist, and they like that. They're very familiar with his work. So it's kind of interesting. You talk to all sorts of people in the museum. It's very cool. And it's beautiful up there.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I think I've only maybe been there once, and it was a long time ago.
So it's a ride up from San Francisco. It's away, but yeah.
I'll read this comment from Kay. She says, thank you for this great talk about Jack London, a Renaissance man. I do not think I've seen his photographs despite viewing a lot of historic photography. Yeah, it's a really great topic. And I think like one of the things I take away from what you said, Avril, is he was just a really fast study. Yeah. And, he's celebrated for his literature, but what he did with photography, to be self-taught and to become that high quality of a photographer is extraordinary.
Yeah, and not just self-taught, but at the beginnings of photography. So it's not like he was studying Cartier-Bresson or anything like that. That guy hadn't come along yet. So yeah, he seems to have a natural sense of what makes a strong image, which is fascinating. And I think partially it is because he was interested in documenting people and their situation, not just the battle or something like that. Yeah, it's kind of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and you realize like what an important, like that's part of the art of photography that we don't often think about is the relationship between the photographer and the subject.
Well, there again, that's a way in which he has something in common with somebody like Dorothea Lange. And I have no idea if she knew of his photographs, probably not, but she also establishes a rapport. And it's also part of her political vision to establish a rapport with her subjects and so forth while photographing them. Again, this is completely apart from the street photographer who snags images, on the run sort of, and makes a great photograph that way. But it's cool. Okay.
Our great Bay Area lefty photographers.
Yay.
What about Darkroom? Do you think he developed his own film and printed his own photographs?
As far as I know, up at the park, there isn't a dark room, but I know that he did on the Snark. He was able to develop photographs on the Snark on the ship, which must have been really difficult. But generally at that time, when snapshot cameras came out by Kodak and so forth, you sent the film back to them and they developed it. People who were, kind of more professional photographers had their dark rooms and so forth, but when it opened up to anybody could take a photograph, you sent the film back. And I know he did that a lot, and was sometimes dissatisfied with, what came back to him. But, so he did both. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because you see like those contrasts and you wonder, is that the result of some, especially on the printing side, I can't imagine he's doing, dodging and, the Ansel Adams techniques, because that's going to come later. But
I think so. And it's interesting because for this presentation, I mean, where do these images come from? Where does anything come from? A lot of them I shot out of the book, which has gorgeous duotones reproduced in it. Others came directly off the web or from the website at the Huntington. And those are the images that are less crisp. Some are better than others. But yeah, when they're properly developed, and in fact, the book that I'm mentioning, there's three people involved with it. Two of them are curators at the Huntington. And the third is a printer who originally was introduced to Jack London's photographs of the earthquake at the centenary of it in, I guess that would be 2016. And he was sort of surprised to see these images and how powerful they were. So he was involved in this project and really was instrumental in developing them properly. But, you know, if you've got a negative that size, you can get a lot out of it. And they apparently did. So it's cool.
Yeah, because those cameras were not, they didn't have lots of megapixels or anything like that. Early cameras. Do you know if he had a relationship with William Randolph Hearst since he was doing work for the Hearst newspapers?
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. And I will also tell you, there's some really fun artifacts up there in the museum. There's a vitrine that has a bunch of his rejections, and he has a rejection signed by M.H. DeYoung from the Chronicle saying, "Thanks, but no thanks."
Yeah.
It's inspirational for all of us. But yeah, I'm sure he did have a relationship with Hearst as he worked for them. Yeah, I think so.
A couple more comments. Wendy says, great talk, thank you. I was at the park yesterday and did a long hike as part of the Bay Area Ridge Trail. Did not see any snakes.
Okay.
Ran out of time to explore the historic sites, but will definitely go back. I didn't realize that the Ridge Trail goes through Jack London State Park, so another reason to go there.
Yes, it must do. The hiking aspect of it is not the one that I know the most about, but it is beautiful, the hike up there. Yeah, no snakes, good. Oh.
And then Kat says, maybe it's in the book you mentioned, how many photographs / negatives are in those archives? Seems like a fabulous rabbit hole to fall down.
That's a good question. Numbers, not my thing. I don't know, but there's a lot. Let me put it that way. If you look at the Jack London archive on the Huntington Library and Museum in Southern California, it's a little bit difficult to do because they're organized according to the sort of scrapbooks that Charmain put together. So some of them will be a lot of just people standing around the ranch and so forth like that. But they're all in there. And even just looking online, you can find a lot of stuff where there's been reviews of this or that, whatever. But yeah, it's at the Huntington. That's where his archive is.
Which, by the way, is just a fabulous place to visit.
Yeah, yeah.
We spent all day there last time we were in the Los Angeles area, and you know, it's a great place just to walk around. It's great for its gardens, but the libraries are also really spectacular and interesting.
Yeah, very cool. Anyway, good.
This is really so prolific, Rodney.
Yeah, yes, Paco. I knew you would enjoy this. Comment from Dodie. Thank you, Avril. We love Jack London State Park, especially beautiful at this time of the year. And glad you're volunteering there. This was a great talk. We know a lot about Jack London, but haven't focused as you did today on his photographs. Thank you for showing us a new perspective on his work. Miss seeing you at OMCA.
I know. Yeah. That's what's fun about this. Nobody knows about his photography, really. I mean, it's just, and somebody mentioned they've seen a lot of historic photographs and never seen his. Well, you wouldn't. He's not ever listed as a sensational photographer or a photographer to pay attention to. But as I said, it was like a discovery of mine being up there, these photographs. And I said, whoa, dude, I've looked at a lot of photographs and these are pretty good. So it's interesting character in lots of ways. But
the question you got to ask is why no exhibition, and particularly at OMCA? It would seem like a perfect thing for the Oakland Museum to spotlight.
Well, I'll send him a message. Yeah,
Yes.
It is interesting. On that subject, a new exhibition will be opening the beginning of November, maybe the 7th or 8th, that is an exhibition of photographs that were just a couple of years ago donated, a whole archive donated to the Oakland Museum. And it's a photographer named Dugan Aguilar. He's an indigenous, a Maidu person, an indigenous photographer. So he has lots of images of his community and not documenting a community in crisis, but a flourishing community. So really interesting. That's a new exhibition of photographs over there. But so I think they're more interested in that than in Jack London these days. But they're, yeah, incredible photographs for sure.
Well, Avril, thank you so much. We just love your presentations. I'd love to have you back again in the future. Any last questions or thoughts for Avril? Alita says, thank you, Avril and Rodney. That was an excellent presentation. I know, Nikki, maybe we need to pin Nikki. And Nikki, you wanted to tell us a little bit about a muralist.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Want to bring to our attention?
Thank you. And thank you, Avril. That was so interesting. I mean, everybody really adores and holds up Jack London, but you brought a whole new aspect to us. So
Good.
I enjoyed all the old San Francisco and Bay Area pictures. So thank you. That was a really a treat. And another treat we had last weekend, I wasn't able to go, and it was a really special event. Lorraine Nakata Garcia, who is a famous artist and muralist in San Francisco. She still lives and does her artwork here, has a new exhibit. It's not really an exhibit, it's a mural. It's a set of murals that she's done at a new housing unit. And the address is 2828 16th Street. It's over there by Cap and South Van Ness. It's up on the second floor. It's part of a whole new housing development, apartment dwellings. So I'm asking how the public can go visit it. I don't know if it's open to the public because it is an apartment building. But anyway, Lorraine has a substantial history in San Francisco as one of the group of muralists, the famous women muralists that helped with the onset of the mural movement in San Francisco in the late 60s. And she's part of that. She lives near me. We've been friends for a long time. And they asked her to put together this set of murals called Make Things New. And it's dedicated to indigenous people. It's all about dignity and aging. And I wasn't able to see it, but I've seen pictures of it and it looks amazing. So I'll find out when the public is allowed to visit the building and see this amazing exhibit. So that was my news of the week.
That's great, Nikki, and we'd love to know more about that. It does bring to mind with something that Avril mentioned at the beginning, which is at the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art, Juana Alicia's art, which she's a muralist also. I think it says, I'm looking at the website, it says it's on display through January 5th.
Oh, only then, yeah.
And that just sounds like I need to get up there. And is that something, Avril, that you're doing? Are you doing tours of that exhibition?
Yeah, I'm in there sometimes, yeah.
Well, that's what, it's funny. In the beginning, I was a little distracted. I thought I heard you say Juana Alicia.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Do you know Juana Alicia?
She also lives here. Yeah, we see her now and then at different events. So they're all part of that same group.
Yeah,
It was such an exciting time. And these women they're older women now, but I mean they are still active. They have things in the Latino Museum in Washington, D.C. They're part of the Smithsonian. I mean, we are so lucky to have such a profound group of women artists here. And I'd love to see Juana Alicia's exhibit. Yeah. I really want to go up there. Yeah, she had something here at the War Memorial last year that was just amazing. And it was free. You just walk in right there and there she was, and you could talk to her and look at her amazing artwork. So
maybe we need to do something on her on art viewing adventures.
That would be great. Yes.
Oh, Nikki, that's Casa Adelante, the ones with the 16th Street.
Oh yeah, we have to bring her. So I'll get in touch with her for you if you want.
Okay, well, we are at 2 o'clock. We should probably wrap up. So thanks again, Avril. It's always just so great to have you and hear these amazing presentations. Hopefully you and I will our paths will cross. We can meet in person sometime in the near future.
Yeah.
But let me turn it back to you, Nikki. What's coming up from the Community Living Campaign?
We have a lot of tech support for our seniors and disabled communities to help them, bridge the gap. We have another nice event coming up called the Good Neighbor. It's going to be an in-person event on November 16th at Ruth's Table in the Mission to honor some of our local heroes that are part of the Community Living Campaign that are not the paid staff, but people that help us. Yeah. So that's I'll give you more information on that as the time gets closer.
And I think Richie Unterberger's next talk, I don't know if it is tonight, because I think he's
It's on Thursday, Rodney.
on Thursday. Yeah. Oh, he's doing Halloween classics. Our boomer music friend, Richie. So I'll maybe tune in for that in between people banging on my door. It's funny because I'm knocking on a lot of people's doors myself for the election, but we're taking a break from that on Halloween for obvious reasons.
Oh, it's going to be a fun night. But boy, that election, we had to do a sleep workshop because people are losing sleep over this election.
Well, worrying doesn't help, but if you want to make phone calls, if you want to send, phone calls are really helpful right now. And, knocking doors, if you can do that, which is what
everybody's got to do something. Yeah.
do something.
Yeah.
All right.
Rodney.
Thanks,
everybody.
Nikki. Thank you, Jennifer, as always.
My pleasure.
Great seeing you, Paco.
Take care, everybody.
I'll see you on the 31st.
Guys, in 2
Rodney.
weeks.
Bye, Paco. Bye, Roger.
Bye.